BCTV receives state arts funding support through a grant from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, a state agency. Funded by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the National Endowment for the Arts, a federal agency.
New Arts Alive features a guest artist who will share their work for a better understanding of today's art. Program moderator is James Carroll. During the live presentation, the home viewer has the opportunity to call and speak directly with the artist. New Arts Alive is brought to you by the New Arts Program, a nonprofit arts service organization in cooperation with Berks Community Television. New Arts Alive is supported in part by the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, local government, area businesses, NAP memberships, and individual contributions.
I'd like to welcome you to New Arts Alive. I'm James Carroll, and with me I have the pleasure of introducing my artist tonight, Michael Winkler. And Michael, as I've always said, that I never have a returning artist unless 10 years have passed. And obviously, 10 years have passed, actually 15. And there's a reason why. I like having people I don't know. That way I like to have a dialogue. If I already know them, the dialogue's different. And obviously from the transition that Michael's gone through in his paintings, there's a new dialogue. And so it's a great privilege to have you back. And Michael is going to be having a show at Northampton Community College and the New Arts Program in Kutztown in February and March at Northampton Community College in 2017, and in March through April at the New Arts Program in Kutztown. So I have every artist or whoever I have on the program always come in. We do a booklet. And a booklet to me is something different than a catalog. A catalog has a bio in it. I don't like bios. They don't prove anything. The work is what it's about. Absolutely. And so, again, Michael will have a booklet, and it seems like we're going to collaborate on something else in relation to that too. Mm-hmm. So, and those are free. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he's going to give you some insights, secrets, don't tell anybody, and, about how he makes things. Okay, Michael?
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. The thing about my relationship with New Arts Program that's really great is the dialogue, is the relationship to discussion of the work, to really looking at it in an experimental way, looking at it in a non-traditional way, and partly that's because my work is a little bit outside the norm. If there is a norm, but basically in terms of culture, in terms of the theories that drive things, there is. I work with language. The most of the use of language, especially text, in visual art is treating the word itself as an image. So you can basically just put text on a gallery wall. You can include it in a painting, and the language, the word itself, functions as an image. You'll get various viewpoints as to whether it's correct to call it an image or not, and that's because of an underlying aspect of the philosophy of art that's been really powerful in, I'd say, the last, certainly since the 60s after the abstract expressionists. And that is the idea that signs, whether that is a word or any kind of a sign that has meaning, something that has meaning to you, but especially in terms of language, is arbitrary. So art has moved more towards practice and references and away from signs. So this idea comes from a man named Ferdinand de Saussure, who lived about 100 years ago and is considered by many to be the father of linguistics. And he came up with the idea that signs were arbitrary because he was looking at the sound of spoken words and thinking about the meanings of those words and not seeing any sort of connection other than a few cases of sound symbolism or onomatopoeia, bees buzz, things like that. So he said must be arbitrary. So that idea of the arbitrariness of signs became attached in semiotics to all different types of signs. And in contemporary art, you see evidence of that when you see museums doing things. You can go into an art museum and there won't be any images. There might be an audio recording playing. There might be a performance piece going on. It might be someone else's signs that are being taken out of context. The Whitney Museum used a catalog essay as an actual piece a couple of biennials ago. So this idea that it's all about the references to the signs and the practice surrounding them, the cultural and sociological aspects, has sort of taken over in the art world, and signs have been pretty much pushed away. And the same idea of Saussure is also carried over into text or written language. I think...
You want to?
Yeah, let's pop up an image here. This is not my actual work. This is just to sort of discuss text, and that's perfect. I think that's great.
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the top is just sort of simulated the words curled in edge as though they were on the wall of a gallery. And you would see this. This could be the work of any number of artists. Lawrence Weiner, in particular, might put text on a gallery wall, but many artists have used text. I think he's notable because he specifically uses just text on the gallery wall. So the idea that, in this case, the signs are the actual words themselves. And the interesting thing about this with written language and with Saussure and this whole idea of arbitrariness is that Saussure was not actually looking at language in the right way. It turns out that you don't read the words curled in edge as an image. You read each and every letter. So you're actually doing it just as when you're a child and you learn to read and you go from one letter to the next.
Would you take that as being a pattern that you're seeing, as opposed to the word, a pattern that it formulates?
Exactly. What you're doing is you're reading it in time, two letters. It's called parallel letter recognition, two letters at a time, very rapidly, incredibly rapidly, so rapidly that you think you're reading an image. But you're actually reading each and every letter, so the old idea that you're reading that as an image, something that was called Boma theory, was really not correct. And the situation in my work is that I'm actually concerned with that pattern that you mentioned, James, the idea that those 26 letters are a code, just as though you'd have letters in the genetic code, or you could also think of it in terms of do, re, mi, such as when you have a sequence in a melody. It's just very rapid, but it's the same kind of idea of that kind of patterning. And so what I do is I place the alphabet in a circular formation. You can see on the top upper left pentagon, those are the 5 vowels, and then the consonants between those vowels are spaced equally on those arcs between the vowels. So there's larger spaces along the top between the A to the I and smaller spaces around the bottom because there are more consonants between vowels along the bottom 3 vowels than there are between the A through I, between the A and the E and the E and the I. The image next to it on the right is 325 lines connecting every one of those 26 letter points to every other letter point. And it creates that strange shape because of that uneven spacing which is oriented around the vowels. But then a very interesting thing happens. When you spell words within that configuration without ever changing the placement of the letters, you get shapes or patterns. The word curled is shown there. So you're just spelling it out from the C-U-R-L-D around, curling around the circle there to create the word curled. And that actually is the way you're reading the pattern. You're actually reading it in sequence, but I'm taking that temporal sequence, the time-based sequence, and converting it into a spatial sequence by using that fixed transformation. It's similar to a kind of process like solo-wit or someone might use where you have a set pattern and you just keep following it. But in this case, you're transforming language with it. And then here's, as an example, here's a detail of another piece. Here are some other words which give you an example of the kind of forms you get. Along the top is randomly regular behavior, even shapes curled, enigmatically discombobulated correspondences. So it's pretty clear. You got shapes has a star, and even is a triangle there, perfectly even angle. Uneven makes it uneven along the bottom. Behavior seems to move around, while regular is a semi-regular shape. You can also see that random looks fairly randomly looks fairly random. Also discombobulated, which is the word with the most letters that seem the most random that I could have ever experimented with. So I like that in comparison to correspondences. So these things happen. Now, whether or not this is something in language that we put there unintentionally, or whether it is a pure coincidence, is arguable. What is, I've been told by people in linguistics that it can't be put there because signs are arbitrary. But of course, Saussure wasn't looking at these kinds of patterns. He was looking at the surface of words. And we're reading the code of words. So it's not impossible that it's something that we've done unintentionally. But we certainly had no intention of putting any of these kinds of patterns in language. But I keep finding them. And for 35 years, I've been finding more and more of them. Here's another detail of the piece. The top line is what we already saw, but then there's intuitive. Lexicological has to do with the structure of meaning, that word. Structures, of course, next to it, and then you have fulfill, axial, extent, axial being the perfect X through the middle of the circle. So these kinds of things show up a lot. There are many words you can't say whether or not they look like the word, because how should a word like intuitive, if you didn't see this, what should intuitive look like? You know, does it feel right? Does it look right? So a lot of times I look at abstract expressionists and people who paint abstract art to try and get ideas about how they feel when I look back at these forms within language. But mine is purely structured, entirely rigorous. I'm not making any of these choices. The circle is never changing. So all the patterns are created by language. They're within language. All I do is set up the system and connect the dots. Here's
and work like mad to keep up with.
Work like mad. And there are over 700,000 English words alone. So here's what the
How
total.
does it work with some foreign words?
I have a few in here, but it does work. It does work with if it's Romanized, if it's a different alphabet. You can Romanize Japanese. You can Romanize Chinese and Russian can be written in the Cyrillic or the Roman alphabet. If it can't be written in the Roman alphabet, then I have a problem, because it has to basically all the French, German, Italian, all those. I've worked with those, and there's one example in here later on. This is just this piece. This is just the same piece, the details showing the completed piece, and it also gives a glimpse of how I paint, because the word structures is painted. You can see the overlay of the lines, and it's just a very simple taping technique. But I did create the colors also using language by overlaying a color wheel on this letter circle. I then let the word draw out the color mix and use that mix of colors in a somewhat complicated way to create that. This is a piece where you can see more of how the colors of different words played out. This is Never Shapes Tomorrow, and this piece is the largest piece I've ever done. It's 13 feet high and 39 feet long. And I did this in a studio in Rotterdam when I was in residence there, and of course I couldn't never take it anywhere or do anything. So I realized that when I was painting 13 by 39 feet, I'd never be able to have it leave, so I just painted it right on the wall and then painted it over when I left. There was an opening, an exhibition, and then...
Did you have a hard time painting over?
Not really, no.
You assumed that in the beginning.
A lot of people showed up to watch me paint it over. They thought, oh, he's not going to really paint that over after he did all that work. But it wasn't... a lot of people got a chance to see it. And
how did you choose the hues that you used?
These were created by the words. So the word never, with overlaying the color wheel onto the letter circle. So you mixed, using some information from golden acrylics, I mixed the pigments so that they would balance in proportion. So you wouldn't, for example, normally a yellow would be completely washed out, completely overtaken by a blue, for example, a phthalocyanine blue or something. But in this case, I balanced them first and then mixed them so they would be equal. Then where the vowels occurred, I then mixed those to form the consonants. So I had 5 basic pigments. Then I got to 26 pigments by those mixes. Then I mixed the letters in proportion. First letter got twice as much as the second letter of the word. Second letter twice as much as the third letter. So the color wheel being meshed on top, a painted color wheel, of the letter circle ended up giving me this green for never. Shapes became this gray. And tomorrow became that blue. And that was created entirely by the mixing colors. I didn't choose them. But what I did do is I didn't want to use expensive acrylic artist paint to paint the whole thing, so I first mixed it with artist colors and then went out and hand mixed wall paints to match it, using some other pigments and things that I found to get very close to it. But it's a little tiny bit off, if you'd see, but it would cost quite a bit of money to paint a 13 by 39 foot piece and then paint it over. So I cheated a little bit there. But basically, if you saw the tests, they're very, very close. So basically, the colors did, the words did create the colors. So that's Never Shapes Tomorrow. This is an older piece. And I put this is from 2007 from a book called Lines. And the interesting thing is...
Your book.
My book.
Your book.
My book.
Called Lines.
Yeah, my book called Lines. And the thing that's interesting about language that kept coming up is that gesture. It turns out that what Saussure didn't understand is that vocal tract gestures are what we read, or what we decipher when we listen to people speak. We don't actually decipher phonemes and sounds. That's why people with different accents from the South, from the North, from overseas, someone who speaks English as a second language, their phonetic pronunciation can be quite different, but often we can still understand what they're saying because we're actually reading vocalic gestures. And this whole idea of gesture, also gesture forms in early language development, gesture happens, sort of paves the way for language. All of these things that I'm saying are in an article that I just wrote that I'll I'll point out a place where you can get a link at the end to the article to if you really want to look into the research and a lot of detail about it. But basically, gesture paves the way for language. And so I thought it was interesting to show how the process of these letter points moving from one to the other in time looks. Because sometimes a word doesn't make much sense visually as a shape, but then in this, for example, when you look at the difference between change and recur, the second on the top, second from the left, and the center top image, you can see change moves, changes in every direction, and recur moves around, R-E-C-U-R. It just keeps spinning around, recurring. Ramble kind of rambles off. Relate does come back on itself. Avoid moves around the circle. Orbit orbits around. And Anne is one of James' wife's favorite words, which I didn't know, because in sign language, in American Sign Language, and is a pull of the fingers. It's an angle like this. So when she saw that right away, she said, it makes perfect sense. So that thinking was matching. And then, of course, flip-flop is
all kinds of connections.
All kinds of connections. So this movement is sometimes important. So some pieces that I do, I will find a way to show the movement. I've done little video things with actual moving, drawing them out, and mostly I work with shapes, but in this case I wanted to show this connection to gesture. And then, James, you'd mentioned the other languages. Here's an example of some words in German. This is a piece that I did as a commissioned piece for Mercedes-Benz in Kassel, Germany, very recently, last spring, actually. And you can see this image around the outside of my forms is actually a gear. This was an axle plant where they made gears, huge truck axles for tractor trailers and things like that. They made machines. They didn't make the bodies. They made the axles. I think it's the largest axle plant in Europe. And so this pinion gear is the center of this whole mechanical structure. So I had this idea that this connection, the precision, when I saw how precise this gear had to be made to work, to function, to pull the amount of weight, to pull hundreds of thousands of pounds, and how it was constructed, there was a natural connection between this gearing rack and pinion system, the engineering of mechanical systems, and the sort of the mechanics of language, the way language was functioning as this rolling out of letters, or certainly in my case of these patterns. So I put my spelled forms of these German words inside the axles as a kind of background to make another connection to this. The top one is roll. And zigzag in German is the next word. This word, I probably am not saying these right. I don't speak German very little. Auglix is kind of off balance, counterbalance. So this thing that's hanging off to the side, it has a lot to do with engineering. They're counterbalancing all of these systems. And the last image there is idea. One of the things that struck me working with German, and I'd worked with it a bit before, was you can't see the word, but the lower left form there is actually similar to the word complex. Basically, a translation would be complexity in English. And it's interesting that I kept seeing in German that there would first be a very regular shape in a case like this. Then you can see all of this stuff sort of hanging off of it that's very complex, almost as though you're stating the opposition first. You're setting up a situation where to show complexity, you first have to show uniformity. And this kind of thing happened a lot in German. There was this kind of structure. And again, I don't know, I can't say for sure that's not pure coincidence, but it doesn't. To me, obviously, it feels like there's something innate or intuitive about the way we structure things with meaning without intending to do so, that there is some sort of carryover. The entire piece, let me show it here. This is a view of the whole piece. It's about, I think it's 78 inches high by 54 inches wide, mixed media. And you can see on the bottom there, there's that Antikythera mechanism, which is the oldest. It's a clockworks that's, I believe it's 2,000 years old. I'm not sure exactly how old, but it's the oldest mechanism like that ever found, and it's incredibly precise. So it was the idea, I was putting this inside their gear and putting my word roll in it to kind of show this origin of engineering and structure that seems to pass through things. A lot for me has to do with circles. And this green block over here on the side is all these little forms are actually entoptic forms. If a person suffers from sensory deprivation or head injuries, if for some reason the sensory information isn't getting through, the system seems to check itself by sending out these little forms. So people will see little flashes of zigzags, crosses, circles, rows of dots. And it seemed to me that letters are kind of like that too. Little crosses, zigzags, dots on things. And so this idea in language that these forms that allow us to break down meaning all around us, to break the sensory field of a room, of people, of the beings and things around us, into recognizable, meaningful things, might be connected. There's obviously something innate that allows us to translate our environment to something that is meaningful and that we can understand, because it's really could be a din of sensory information that just, it's particles and waves, and somehow it becomes beings and meaningful things to us. So to me, that's a sign too. That's a natural sign. So I'm sort of connecting natural signs and how physics and mechanics and things like that work in this piece. And then this last one is curled edge, and it's where I started. And as I was talking about those entoptic forms before, this is the word curled on the top around a shell bead, and this is a drawing of one, but it's a drawing of a shell bead that pushed back the evidence for the origin of language from 60,000 years to 125,000 years. They thought that language was fairly recent in human development, and then they found this bead that someone had been wearing. And if you adorn yourself with beads, it means you have a sense of identity, a concept of yourself. So if you have that concept and you're sharing that concept, that's communication. That's a form of communication. So the idea is that you then have language. So I thought it was interesting that this curled shell bead kind of mimics the word curled. And this other edge is shown with the edge of a hand axe that's much older than the shell bead. And the idea that the word edge is at the top, at the very top of the circle, of course, also is meaningful to me. So I see a lot of ancient markings, markings from the emergence of the symbolic mind that are connected to these patterns in language that I work with all the time. So I'm always experimenting with that in my work. You'll see all of a sudden petroglyphs from 200,000 years ago in the context in books, frequently in artist books. I'll use that. I work with artist books a lot because of being able to cross those from archaeology to mathematics.
It's your way of communicating.
Right.
I mean, in essence.
Right. Exactly. So that's basically, I connect the dots and I spell words and create this imagery.
Now, when I look at that circle of edge with the circular forms in there instead of just letters, you can see how they're placed more distinctly and the distance between. I mean, much more evident there.
And that's a takeoff on that circle is actually an ancient bead, not as old as the 125,000-year-old bead, but it's a disc bead from about, I think it's probably only about 6,000 years old. But I thought the idea of thinking about those letter points as beads, somehow for me it translated that mathematical idea of a point into something real, like a letter could be. And this also shows that I'm using the same bead, and what makes it different is its placement. So this is the really interesting thing about language, is that it's not the name of the letter that gives it its identity. As a matter of fact, some letters that were represented by a character now, one letter, that character represented a different letter in the past. And of course you can represent letters in Braille. You can use Morse code. You know, the form that it takes is irrelevant. But its position in the alphabet is really important, because certain letters have certain roles. You know, you put a UN in front of a word, it changes it to the opposite meaning. And that happens not with one word, but it happens continuously. But it's not the fact that it's shaped like a U and an N, it's the position of those two letters in the alphabet and that role that they play. But all of this, what's interesting about all this discussion is that in linguistics, they say it's not possible because they're arbitrary, okay? Or fundamentally arbitrary. They leave a little room that but basically they're arbitrary. And so they're only concerned with language in terms of syntax and things like that. So they don't get into the signs. They just pretty much, few exceptions, because there was a fellow, Pierce, who worked with signs, who has had influence on some people, and there is some discussion of signs, but not much. And basically signs are considered arbitrary. And then this whole approach, as I said, goes into the arts, because if the signs are arbitrary, it doesn't matter if I'm in a museum whether I'll give an example of Joseph Kossuth's 1 and 3 hammers. His idea was that language was material, so he's thinking that the word hammer is a sign for a hammer. So if he puts up an actual hammer, and he puts up the definition and the word for hammer, and he puts up a picture of a hammer, 1 and 3 hammers, they're all the same. So you can use those. That's kind of a vignette of what's happening in the art world, is the sign doesn't matter. And I do think the social connections, the reasons artists choose signs, the history of the sign, I think that's really important, because that context is a whole level of information that obviously relates to art on a fundamental level, but the sign also has to be factored in. And one of the things that I believe is that if you're going to put language in any work, the sign for a word, there's nothing like this in visual art where you have you have this kind of a pattern from reading every letter. You might make a case for it in film, since you have sequencing or other time-based art forms. But the reality of it is it's unique to language. So the very act of reading recalls the critical mass of literature. And so when you put text on the wall of a gallery, my view is that you should be looking at it initially from a literary point of view. Does it have any literary value? Then you can look at it from a visual point of view. What's its visual value? To me, you should start critiquing interdisciplinary art from the perspective of each of the disciplines. Then decide, are they related? Has the artist related those disciplines in any way to make it interdisciplinary, or is it just multidisciplinary? Is it just a collection of different signs? And then the last level should be the sociological level of connection. So I think critique should happen on a multi-level situation, and signs should definitely be included in that, and they're not now. So in my view, you see a lot of art where language is included, but it doesn't have any literary value. And it's simply that, we're presenting it in this context. So since we're now presenting these words in the context of a gallery, that's new, because they're words and now we're treating them as that. But you've actually brought literature in. So you've brought the whole critical level of how you critique language with it. You can't bring the words in without bringing literature in. So that's kind of my beef with the whole way things are moving right now, is that the sign is just completely disregarded. And obviously, if that happens, my work doesn't fare very well because it's all about the sign. So, if you disregard the value of the signs,
Zero.
yeah, there's not much interest. And obviously I'm interested in it. That's why I've been doing it for 35 years, working with the same circle of letters, the same pattern. I've worked with maybe 12 or 15 languages to some extent. Frequently, if I work with another language, I have to have somebody who's a native speaker because I won't understand the images. I will think that's worthless, that image is meaningless, and the person who speaks that, no, that's meaning to me. I worked with Danish very briefly, and a Danish person kept picking out these things that I thought were not interesting visually, who they thought were very interesting visually. Patterns of that language, but that was also difficult because Danish doesn't have the right number of vowels, and so there were other issues there. It has to be really the language for me to work with. It has to be pretty much mapped into a Roman alphabetic system. It has to be sort of have the same A, E, I, O, U, 5 basic vowels. So I could work with Latin or French or German. Many languages, but certain languages, there are African languages that are cliques and things like that, sorts of things. So, but there is one other thing, actually, I will say, that there's also, if this was innate in any way, if we were doing this, creating meaningful patterns intuitively, you would expect to see some connections between languages, and actually there are. There are so many connections, in fact, that a lot of languages, many of the languages of Europe, English, I think there are about 60 languages that are all believed to be descendants of a language called Indo-European. But the truth is there has never been any Indo-European language or culture that's been discovered. There's no real evidence of it. There are just so many connections between these languages, between the root words, the morphemes, basically the meaningful elements of words. There are so many connections that they say, well, they must have all been descended from the same language. Well, maybe it's not. I don't know. But since there's no evidence, it also could be that this similarity comes from the fact that there is an unconscious, intuitive influence on the patterning. So, I don't know, but that's partly what fascinates me. Is you don't know where it comes from. Is it coincidence? Is it something innate? That's what makes it art. That's why I think it's better dealt with in art than science, because who knows in the end? It's open for question, and the viewer makes up their own mind.
Do you happen to have an image of a painting that you have done?
Just the ones that I showed. Just the Never Shapes Tomorrow, and they're all the paintings are recent ones are like that, with just the simple forms, with the overlap, like the Never.
But you didn't bring any more.
No. I could bring a lot of those, but then I have to then show. If you're not familiar with it, there are people who can read them in the gallery without seeing the letters, and just go in and see a painting and see the form and go, oh, there's shapes, oh, there's structures, oh, there's, you probably actually would recognize some, and from experience, James. But if people aren't familiar with the work, a lot of times I've been in exhibitions and people will think they're just abstraction, really graphic geometric abstractions, and even if I have images over to the side, people make it very complicated. They don't understand that's just a circle with letters around it connecting the dots. They'll think it looks, I've heard people, it looks mathematical. I'm not good at mathematics, and walk away, and then not realize that all these paintings are just that.
Have you ever thought of using glasses so that when you put the glass on, you can see the alphabet?
No, that would be interesting, though. Yeah, it would be interesting.
In other words, you put it on, you could see the alphabet with it, and take it off, and you would...
Yeah, if you had some glasses with maybe a certain kind of light filtering thing or something, that would be... Because was my dilemma for years. was how do I want to show the system, but I also don't want the system to overtake the art. I want people to know about, okay, this is what it comes from. But for a long time, I wouldn't take the letters out of the painting. And then people kept saying, well, it just looks like graphics, all the time. And I finally realized it's distracting the imagery. It's detracting, rather, from the imagery. And so I finally did take the letters out. Now it's been 20 years ago when I did that. But in the New Arts Program exhibition, I'm going to have some older works, and you see lots and lots of works with, the letters off somewhere still put in, even if there's an abstract image in the center of the piece. Maybe there's a band of the words to explain it across. So there's information on the edges of the actual, what I consider the art, the process, because it's really difficult on that level to bridge that. How do you bridge that? Some people had said, well, just don't worry if people don't understand. But if I go in and the word, if, for example, if you don't know that this is never on the one side and shapes in the middle and tomorrow is the blue one, if you don't know that and you just look at those, I don't find, personally, I'm not all that interested in those as pure shapes. I am when I think, oh, that comes from the language actually created that. I find that really interesting because of never creating this sort of line, almost like a do not pass to me, and obviously the star coming from shapes, and the open-endedness of tomorrow. But if I just, frequently what will happen when I put this in a gallery, if people are not familiar with the processes, they will say, oh, that was my idea of tomorrow, to leave the open blue area on the top, the open-endedness. And it's my idea to put this rigid, triangle.
Well, that comes from being told that they are to interpret the work. And your interpretation of what's given can sometimes not be the complete picture. And you want the whole picture to be given in some way.
Exactly, James. I want people to realize that our ancestors, this was all, spelling of words was evolving until we fixed it with dictionaries, till we stopped its evolution. It was evolving for hundreds of years, and at least with English, and then you can go back before that because they came from Latin roots and whatever. So I didn't create these forms. All the people who had any influence in how we ended up with these particular sequence of letters for this particular word created these forms. So it's a kind of collective consciousness. It's kind of like Jung's collective unconscious, that I'm really saying, if there's something there, it's not one person's intuition. And maybe that's why it works, is because as it felt more and more comfortable to more and more people, maybe that's what refined it. Maybe that's how it became more effective, because on any given day, my intuition or my innate decision-making ability might not be right on the target. But if you get 100 people in a room, or 1,000 people, and all different days they're making judgments about the same thing, and by using that word and pronouncing it the way they do and writing it the way they did, you sort of distill it into the essence of all of that intuition, I think. So it's collective, kind of a collective thing, but it's not for me. So I have nothing to do with the form other than saying I made a rigid, Some people have said, why did you use a circle? The reason for a circle is it's the only geometric figure which doesn't preference any points by its shape. So that's why we use it for a clock face, although you can still see a circle in a square with a square clock. It's basically a pie chart. So there's no other geometric form like that has no preferential points. So it's simple, and then it's just spacing the vowels around the consonants, and then whatever happens, the people who created the language, the unnamed people, that created the words we're speaking now, and these letter sequences are the artists. I just map it out in the end.
I'm trying to think of the artists I had in last year. Betty She deals with lost languages. You know, ones that there's no one speaking it.
Right, right. Dead languages and lost and that's.
Could there be any relationship between?
It could be. I mean, the
Betty
whole
Beaumont.
Betty Beaumont. Oh yeah, I've heard of her. Yeah, I think the whole idea of language, the whole mystery, the whole. I mean, it's the essence of culture. Nothing happens without language. Language yet we tend to look at it very superficially, especially in the arts. You know, you people will go into a gallery, and if you can't read it, if you have to really look into it and understand it, people are put off by that. You know, but it's very mysterious. It's interesting. There's going back to gesture. There's Nicaragua had a large population of deaf people, and they thought they would put a school together to teach them sign language. And so they got them all these deaf children in the school to teach them sign language, and none of the children wanted to learn it. But then they used their own simple gestures and ended up creating a fully syntactical sign language of their own at the school rather than learning the sign language. They did it naturally. And so it just emerged, and I hear there's another instance of that, I think, in Africa, or now they've found a couple of other ones. So, you know, this thing that, you know, have this capacity to do it, it's marvelous, and it doesn't seem to be limited to visualization or to speaking, you know, or anything. It's this capacity to want to communicate this meaning, and that's why I think I believe it's possible that we made signs that had meaning, because the whole point of creating language is to somehow convey meaning from one person to another, for me to convey it to you, and so that's the power that's driving it, and that desire to then somehow get a bit of that meaning, and I don't know how much, I don't know if it's true, but to get that into the sign doesn't seem so far-fetched to me. But we tend to think, I mean, I was just seeing a special where it was talking about how many decisions we make not without our rational mind. Most of the decisions we make in life, we don't do rationally. It was a brain, I forget what the...
I think most of it.
Yeah. So, you know, so there's a lot of intuitive stuff going on. So, big mystery.
Yeah. A lot of political.
Yeah, language being used that way too. Badly. Yeah, it's true. So yeah.
Some of your early work, when you had a show in 2000, your work was on stone.
Yes, yes.
And
the first time I ever did that was at the New Arts Program. I since did a piece like that in Brooklyn, in Havemeyer Park, in 2014. And it was, I make petroglyphs that look like real petroglyphs, put them on stone, and they're actually the word forms, and then somewhere I have a little sign that you can decipher it. But I set it up as though you found this, because it's the archaeology of language.
One thing about them, they're sort of graphic in a way, stone, because you could actually print.
True, you could.
It's like a plate.
Could be a lithographic stone. You're right. As a matter of fact, I think I did some rubbings of them at the New Arts Program. I think I took some of those stones and did some rubbings of them.
Lithograph has no surface quality. I mean, you can't feel any of that. But like a plate that's been etched, or a stylus has been pushed into it, there's a physical tactile quality.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a beautiful drawing by a lady, Anne Heilman, she died 5 years ago. And she has a painting, a drawing, I should say, done with colored pencil. And what makes it beautiful is that all of the tactile qualities in there are purely visual. The hair, how it's combed, the cone of the the bird, the feathers of the bird. There's no touch. You can't touch it and feel it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
there's actually what's important from my standpoint in that is that most artists don't deal with it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
no,
usually the tactile.
Yeah.
They have to feel it.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Oh, I had promised that I would say where you could, if you want to see that article, it is, you can go to my Facebook page and there's a link to it. And it's like a 12-page article. It's written, it's an academic style article, but it does talk about all of these gestures and all the things we've talked about now here. And so it's possible to go to the Facebook page, Michael Winkler Art Facebook page, which is open. It's not a personal page. It's one of these, like a public page. And there's
Public
a link,
domain.
yeah, to look at the article, to read it. And also contact me or through there, leave a message for me if you have questions or anything. Dialogue's very important, and that's how I progress too. That's why I love working in these kind of situations, because
Well, I would like to remind you that in 2017, in the spring over at Northampton Community College, he'll have an exhibition, and it will overlap for the winter, I should say, for Northampton, and the one in the spring is at the New Arts program, but they do overlap about 2 weeks, so you can see them both in a very short period of time, I suppose. And also the booklet that we do will have more information.
that'll be great.
This dialogue will be in there.
Great, wonderful.
I'd like to thank you, Michael, for being here with us and sharing all your secrets. And I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. I'm James Carroll, and good night.
New Arts Alive is produced through Berks Community Television and can be seen live on the second Tuesday of each month at 5 p.m. Consult your local community cable service for live and repeat programming. For more information about the New Arts program and its consultation residencies of artists from the literary, visual, and performing arts, call 683-6440 or write New Arts Program, P.O. Box 82, Kutztown, PA 19530. Or visit the office and exhibition space at 173 West Main Street, Kutztown, PA. Hours are Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday 1 to 5, Saturday 10 to 2, or by appointment.
BCTV receives state arts funding support through a grant from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, a state agency. Funded by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the National Endowment for the Arts, a federal agency.